So that's myself, Chris, and Kristen. And then so today, really, Jennifer and Ben, thanks for coming, really setting the context for what we, why this subcommittee is in existence, and goals that we'll have, and we'll go from there. Anyone have any additional introductions to add?
Let's dig in.
Yeah. All right. So Jennifer, you are first on the agenda.
Lucky me. How's everybody? Good. Yay. So yes, just to sort of set the context, I think in May, maybe I came and did a presentation on the CAF strategies report. So I think everybody's familiar with that. I'm happy to share the slide that specifically talks about this, or I can just talk it through, whatever happens. Excuse me.
Oh, everyone's coughing again.
I know, I'm just, hold on. Sorry, I was multitasking. So as you all remember, the CAF strategies report really came out of the Serrano issues that happened a couple of years ago. And, there were a lot of lessons learned from the county about, as our portfolio continues to grow, there's more that we need to do for oversight. When I started with the county, I think 11 years ago, we had like 3,000 committed affordable units. Now it's more like 12,000. So that's good news on the affordability side. However, from a sort of maintenance preservation kind of side, it gets increasingly challenging. So we really took some time. We met with community members, staff from lots of different departments to really think through, not just for the Serrano, but what have we learned we're really going to need to do to make sure that we keep our CAF properties well maintained and really put a resident focus on what we're doing. A lot of the feedback that we had gotten was around, obviously the physical state of the properties, but also, how can residents get support if they need it? Do they know what their rights and responsibilities are? What happens if their property manager isn't responsive? So a lot of those kinds of questions came up. So out of all of that, we did our CAF strategies report, which has a bunch of different strategies in a bunch of different areas. So this one in particular, we're really glad that you guys are willing to take this on. This really came out of the Tenant Landlord Commission, I think. For those of you who have been around a while, certainly Kristen and Rhoda, I guess, remember we used to have a staff person who was a trained mediator, and her job was to, mediate between tenants and landlords if there were issues. The county is not doing that anymore directly for a number of reasons, and so that that function sort of fell away. And what we've heard a lot from you all, also from residents, is there's a gap between if there's an issue between a resident and landlord, if there's only certain tools that the county is able to offer to help resolve issues, and Ben's going to talk a lot about what those different tools are. So sometimes people will call us and we'll say, did you try doing this? Did you try doing that? And if none of it worked, the next thing that we can offer really is getting legal help. And for a lot of people, as you all know better than anybody, there's a lot of barriers behind that, whether it's cost or language, or if people are undocumented and they're uncomfortable about it. Or, something that we've really been thinking about is, what if there's something that isn't really a legal issue, but more of a customer service issue, or more, a code issue? Maybe it's something that that none of these are really the right way to fix it. So looking for some sort of alternative dispute resolution solution would be great. So this we're hoping that you all your work will help us figure out what is the gap, like what are the issues that people can't get the help that they need? And sometimes the answer might be there isn't help. Maybe there's no law that supports that, or maybe, but what's a way that we can better share that with people, or what are different options that people have to go to? So that's kind of what we're hoping this group will do. So we're really excited you're willing to do that. Rhoda's done a little, yes, go ahead.
Can I ask a quick question before we get too far away from it? Can you talk a little bit about, and so I have the context because I haven't been around as much. Why did the county decide to discontinue that mediation person who used to do that type of work? If you can talk, just so we know what did or did not work, so that we maybe don't reinvent the wheel or reinvent the past.
Sure, that makes sense. So it was, I was peripheral to the whole thing. So Rhoda, jump in if I sort of missed anything, but she didn't actually have a lot of work. I mean, I think a lot of it was people, both tenants and landlords have to be willing to come have a conversation, and it has to be voluntary. And in a lot of cases that didn't happen. So a tenant would come to her and say, I've got this issue with my landlord. And she'd say, hey, landlord, do you want to come talk about this? And if they say no, again, it's voluntary. So, I don't know if that was an outreach issue. I don't know why that was, but so she didn't end up having as much of a role as I think we had thought she would have. We also heard from our county attorney's office that they were uncomfortable, and we have a whole new set of attorneys. So I don't know, if we can always ask this question again, but they were uncomfortable with the county really serving as an arbiter, thinking that it's a private matter between private landlords and a tenant. And so for us to come in and try to arbitrate, whatever, was maybe not appropriate, or maybe we couldn't come to the same solution. And I'm sure Ben has some additional sort of thoughts on that. So those were, I guess, the two main reasons.
Got it. Thank you. Helpful.
So I guess that's all I have. I just again wanted to set the context. We really appreciate. I know what I was starting to say. So Rhoda had done some initial research. I know you all have talked about it, sort of what neighboring jurisdictions do differently. Fairfax County has an ombudsman in their consumer affairs department who's able to do more of the sort of arbitration. Alexandria's tenant landlord commission actually does more arbitration. So there's different models of different ways that people do things. So our hope is that, first you can help us do research on what are some different models that would work in the state of Virginia. Obviously, we're pretty limited in some of the stuff we can do. What are some models, what's worked, what hasn't, and what would you recommend and what are the gaps? I think that's going to be really important. Like what is it that people are not able to get what they need? So, that might be a question of reaching out to tenants who come in, and, it could be a survey, however you guys think would be the best way to figure that out. So that's kind of all I got. Ben, do you want to help sort of frame the context? I know you've been very involved in a lot of this stuff too.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll kind of step back, go back a little bit, just to give kind of as by way of an introduction to me and my role. I'm again Ben Aiken, and I'm the director of constituent services, and our office works out of the county manager's office. We over time, as Jennifer was just talking about, roles that have evolved or gone away or come back, and ideas that change and shift over time. We historically had two functions, one being the resident ombudsman function, and the second being the business ombudsman function. We still hold, and my colleague who works for me, Caitlin Thomas, we still hold the ceremonial titles, she as business ombuds and myself as resident ombuds. But over time, again, evolving thinking and some budget cuts, or maybe I'll say diplomatically, seeking efficiencies, we saw not only an opportunity, but also like a sense from the community that these issues between business and resident were very blurred. It was often that we were faced with challenges that were not only business challenges, but they were resident challenges. And sometimes it felt like we were sort of either working against each other or not sort of framing things with a commonality, so that, and we also don't want to be seen as pitting businesses versus residents. And so that perception kind of persisted for a while. And so what we've done is, again, we still hold the ceremonial titles because for certain people it is important, and in the business community especially, they actually pitch, our economic development folks pitch the county as having a business ombuds, and we do help businesses a lot of times. It's like with permitting matters and trying to expedite things to try to get their business started, that sort of issue. But we really like to refer to ourselves as constituent services. And what we do is help ensure Arlington's government works for everyone, all those living, working, or conducting business in or visiting the county for that matter. Our visitors are important as well. So they are all effectually constituents that we may serve. One segment of that constituent service is obviously housing related matters, and getting down another layer of detail, like to housing complaints and specifically tenants, landlords, and then further our housing choice voucher, our housing grant recipients, and our committed affordable unit residents are a particularly important subset of that constituency, and so we focus a lot of time and energy when complaints come in from that subset of our population. On the basis of equity, we feel pretty grounded in that. That's in general a vulnerable population and in many ways historically marginalized, and one we want to focus our time and attention toward. A lot of that is sort of imbued in the Committed Affordable Units or the CAF strategies document that Jennifer mentioned, and we play a role in that in several ways, but one is a convener of the internal stakeholders group. So we're kind of charged, and I coordinate and convene a meeting of, it's nearly every department in the county at this point, of subject matter experts and staff who represent to help basically connect internal dots, so that if one segment of the organization is getting a certain they're hearing things in the community, we each engage in our own ways. If they're hearing things in their line of work, they can come back to our group, and we have open lines of communication so that we're all sharing information collaboratively, which was, again, an action item and recommendation coming from the Serrano that we've felt like in the last year made a lot of progress on, improving the internal communications and the relationships really between the various departments that are charged with helping these folks. And so what we do really in constituent services is try to make referrals to any of our given agencies, but specifically, like with housing complaints, it's often to our enforcement agencies. So for things like maintenance concerns, right, like failing heating equipment, inoperable windows, or water damage, we try to connect those individuals with our Inspection Services Division code enforcement section, because those are Virginia maintenance code issues that can be addressed under Virginia law and by the building official. And so if those people are willing to engage with that service, then we can connect them, and then those complaints can be processed and investigations can be made, and hopefully working with the building managers, those issues can be addressed. Rodent and pest control is another major area. I'm not going to hit on every single complaint type that we have. It would bore you, but rodent and pest control is another big one. And so we can assist there in two ways. We have our Department of Human Services Environmental Health Division, who sort of can consult with building owners on rodent abatement and vector control, and really help them, educate them on best practices and how to deal with these things, because they're seeing it countywide, and so can offer that expertise. But also through code enforcement, depending on the building conditions, there may be actual, again, Virginia Maintenance Code violations that we can try to resolve and get remedy to through the enforcement section as well. We get a lot of general questions about roles and responsibilities, landlord rights, and tenant rights. And so we make sure people are availed of the CPHD Housing Information Center. It's a knowledge base. It's a resource for folks to ask general questions. Of course, they can't provide legal advice. And then further, they can't actually take sides or mediate the dispute. So that kind of brings us to where we are now with your line of work. But the Housing Information Center is another area of referral that Constituent Services uses very routinely. Specifically for our Department of Human Services, and I'll say DHS, if you're not, you're probably all familiar with some of our acronyms, so I'll try not to acronymize too much, but DHS clients, we really emphasize for those folks communicating directly with their case workers and case managers. And then as necessary, if they have kind of personnel complaints or they have case management complaints, we escalate those concerns within the appropriate line of business in DHS with leadership, so that we know, we don't really intervene in personnel issues or management issues, but we will escalate and make sure that leadership is aware, and then the proper attention is given to things where clients may have a problem with their case manager. They actually have a really great process and protocol that they follow in DHS, where complaints can be processed very in a neutral way. But sometimes clients want to contact the county board or county manager's office to let us know about something, and so that's when we get involved. with those things. Kristen asked me a great question. Kristen, I'll just read here. On average, how many interactions do you have with residents on a weekly basis? Do you track inquiries by property or issue? I don't have those numbers in front of me, but we do track. We have a customer relationship or constituent relationship management system that we track issues and intake. So if we're doing kind of our casework, we will typically track those. We do not have the technology in place, for instance, to track every single phone call we get. So I can't say like I'm going to say 100 interactions per week. We may have had 200, but most of those were phone calls that ended up being like, yep, let me transfer you. You just ended up here by accident, right? And so we're not tracking every one of those interactions. So it's a little bit discretionary, but if we have involvement like that requires our follow-up or interaction with staff to gather some information or to respond to a constituent, we do track all of those. And so we would, I'd be happy to share those numbers with you to give you a sense. They are tracked by issue, but they aren't tracked by geography very closely. We're actually in the middle, and I don't want to get too far off track, but we're in the middle of a modernization project for that customer relationship management system that I mentioned to give us a little bit better insights and data quality so that we could aggregate issues by geographies a little bit more effectively. One challenge that we have is in ensuring privacy and anonymity when folks contact us. So for instance, if we have to be very careful about how we ask for an individual's information, but we're trying to segment data in ways where we can ask about the location notionally, whether it's a building, like you don't have to give us your apartment, for instance, you can just give us the building and you don't have to give us your name or anything else. But if we can associate it with a building, then perhaps we can aggregate information, and then that would tell us, kind of be that canary in the proverbial coal mine of like, wow, we've got a lot of rodent abatement questions from this particular property or this particular zip code or whatever kind of geographic aggregation we choose to use to sort of identify and flag those issues. We are in the, I don't want to oversell, like we're in the infancy of having those conversations about data management and controls and things. So more to come there, but it's definitely on our minds as to how we can do that work. I think I can give you a little bit better sense. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I just have one quick question. Is that system, is the constituent relationship management system, is that for your office in particular, or for example, does the housing, if a call or email comes into the housing information center, is that log that Jennifer's mentioning, does that aggregate up so that you see, things that don't come directly to you but are relevant to say housing?
So the short answer to that question is no. The longer answer is we are working on ways to sort of permit access to the system and expand its usage beyond just the county board and county manager's office. But for now, it really is a tracking system for the county board, county manager. As a legacy, it was more for like almost advocacy tracking and sentiment discussions, like are people for or against a particular policy or issue, or, as we do constituent services, it's kind of broadened over time. So now it's a lot more topical. And so we're looking at ways to expand that system. And then that's actually one of the CAF strategies action items, is to expand the use of that infrastructure, that technology, to give the Housing Information Center, for instance, among other segments of the organization, insights and access so that we're all sharing customer data collaboratively. Because again, right now it is siloed. Not everyone, but I'll just say everyone does things a little bit differently. The Housing Information Center tracks things differently than the county manager's office, tracks things differently than DHS. And we all have stores of customer data that don't necessarily talk to one another. But as I mentioned, So the first step was getting relationships between the people responsible for those systems built. And then I think the next step, and probably this is, more of a 1, 2, 3 year plan, is to get the systems and the people integrated and talking with one another internally. I would say we're slowly building what other governments call their 311 system. We're just doing it in a very sort of piecemeal, some would say pragmatic, others would say slow way. but the infrastructure is all there. We do have the technology in place. It's really a matter of implementing it and creating applications that we can all use and share information with. So again, I could go on. I love that topic.
That's
yeah.
Super helpful. And I just hit me that we don't have a 311 system.
I was just gonna ask.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's right. We do. So to your point, there is no centralized. There is no 311 system. Wow, I didn't realize that.
So,
Yeah.
Ben, when someone wants to interact with constituent services, there's a phone number that they call that's on the Arlington website.
Correct. Yep. We basically just call the county manager's office, and we're there. Like we're the external component of the county manager's office for all intents and purposes. So 703-228-3120. That's constituent services. We also staff the county's general information phone number, which I think publicly some people have the perception that is the 311. It is not. It is just two people who answer that phone and try to help direct those calls. But that's 703-228-3000. That's also constituent services. People also email the county manager's office, just county-manager@arlingtonva.us. That's also constituent services. We are also in the county's report a problem system. That is a big store of kind of customer complaint generation. And so it's the request a service or report a problem application. That's more for typically like public works types of things, right? Like we've got a pothole that needs repairing. There's a street light that's out. There's a stop sign that's spun around the wrong way and needs looking at. There's a park with a bench that's tipped over. It's those types of complaints. But the secret menu item there is a general inquiry that is also constituent services. We have our fingers in a lot of different venues in order to be a force multiplier, but also to help staff. So yes, they can contact us in any different number of ways.
How big is your team?
My team, small but mighty. We're myself, and then I have a constituent services manager, I mentioned, Caitlin Thomas, and then we have 2 administrative specialists who are sort of our generalists who are able to, they really know all the different agencies and generally what everybody does, so that when people are misdirected to either the county board or county manager's office, we're able to get them placed with the right staff. Because we're really not the ones that are ultimately going to solve the problem. The problem is going to be solved by folks like Jennifer and her team, and folks like our code enforcement, our Department of Human Services, like I mentioned. So all we're really doing is shuffling people from, maybe a misdirected call or email to the right location. Now, on occasion, we do get involved in like policy escalations and matters that involve multiple agencies and more kind of thorny, sticky issues that just are left unsolved for a number of reasons. We do get involved in those types of things as like special projects. And that hopefully is the majority of our work. We are also adding where you're sitting right now, just below you, where you see kind of this half circle desk on the lobby level. That is going to be the county's Welcome and Information Center, and that will be the Constituent Services Welcome and Information Center come March of this year. So we're adding 2 staff that will be the sort of front-facing service for county operations at the Bosman Center. And they'll do a number of things, but basically just be building concierge and then information and referral for anybody who walks in. And then hopefully they can help answer some phone calls as well for us as we staff that up and get them trained. So I'll be adding 2 people to the team of 4 that we have now.
And so when someone calls and say it's the rodent and pest issue, which I'm sure that people from Serrano had called about.
Right.
does constituent services take that down and then transfer them to a person to help, or do they say call this number? Like, how is that interaction usually?
It depends. We like to ask a few questions. Most people call us, they're upset, right? So we have some de-escalation that we do, some empathetic listening, making sure people are heard first and foremost, and then that sort of gets us back to neutral. And then we're able to ask some questions like, well, have you called anyone else about this? And sometimes the answer is yes. I've called 15 other numbers and no one's picking up the phone, and you're the first person that's answered the phone. And in those cases, that's going to give us an indicator that like this is probably something we need to prioritize. So we're going to take that person's information if they're comfortable giving it to us, and maybe investigate a little bit with the teams perhaps that they mentioned. Like, I called this number and this person told me, no, that's not our responsibility. You need to go over to here. And then I called that number and that was a road to nowhere and no one picked up the phone. So we'll do some investigation sort of and interrogate that, both with question and answer from the person who's calling, but also as follow up with the staff that are involved or being alleged to have not done their job or something like that. We kind of interrogate those matters as a matter of discretion. So again, priority given to folks who, for us, who have expressed that they've tried to solve this issue with self-help but are unable to. If someone just says, no, you're the first number that I saw, great, that's awesome, thanks for calling us. But I'm going to encourage you first to call, for like I said, with the road and pest control, I'm going to encourage you to contact our code enforcement and then try to give them a little bit of information about code enforcement. So code enforcement works with anonymity, but they will need access to your home or apartment in order to investigate. If you're not comfortable with that, that may pose some challenges for them, and try to, again, like make it as warm of a handoff as we can make it, but give them the resource that they need to try to self-help and solve the problem. And then encourage them, if they're not able to get the answer that they need, to give us a call back, because at that point, then, that sort of tiers our escalation and helps prioritize. But again, it's kind of a judgment call on a case-by-case basis and a phone call-by-phone call basis as to how we're going to hand those off.
And I know you started listing some of the issues that your team has handled, and won't go into detail with all of them, but is that like a documented list that you could share with us?
As it pertains to housing complaints, I could try to see how we could slice and dice the data and maybe give you some insights into like how many of those included the word rodent or rat or mice or some keyword searches. I could probe at the data and try to help identify those types of issues. Topically, like I said, it is mostly things that I term code enforcement, like maintenance of the building or property, and then rodent and pest abatement is as a second issue. And then Jennifer mentioned, and this is another one, and this is like, again, one where we wish we could sort of, maybe not wish, but like it having the ability to provide an intervention on customer service complaints. Because we do have to ultimately explain that like the county doesn't control whether your landlord sent that email to the wrong email account because they didn't update your, with the right email that you gave them, and now you're upset because you got a late notice and because you didn't receive the email. Well, I'm sorry, that's more of like a customer service operational thing, but not necessarily something that I can point to, the county being able to resolve, but would be ripe for the type of alternative conflict resolution mediation service that you, I think, have like a concept of being able to help. Again, the challenge being both parties willingly coming and participating, but some of that can be overcome, I think, with relationship management and again, for our committed affordable unit properties, and properties where we know we want to focus maybe more time and effort, the AHCs and the APAs of the world are going to be very willing, hopefully, to participate because they're recipients of county loan funds and partnership credibility and things of that nature. So I would hope that they would be willing participants in whether it's arbitration, non-binding mediation service, other, conflict resolution setting, I would hope that they would come to the table. But yeah.
I think, so I think, Ben, it would be helpful to get, and to Jennifer's point in the comments, I think one thing that would be helpful for maybe not next meeting, but as a next step would be an understanding of maybe a year or 2 year, 3 year period. What are the types of issues that are flowing through either your office or the Housing Information Center? Because I think that'll help us target, if 90% of issues are coming through code end up being coded as code enforcement issues, that might, our work might be, let's talk to code enforcement about what getting them in the room or expedited consideration versus if it's, like you said, a bunch of customer service. Anyway, regardless of what the actual answers are, knowing the kinds of challenges that are flowing through the two, it sounds like foci point, would be helpful as we go forward. So yeah, just putting that in the parking lot of next steps.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to follow up with all the data that we have. I'm also mindful, but I'll say it for the benefit of this group that our data is a very small representative sample of people who were either willing, able, or somehow found their way to either the county board or county manager's office. Most of our complaint resolution and service processing is at the departmental level, and maybe not even within Housing Information Center. It is really with, for instance, code enforcement, sometimes with zoning enforcement, sometimes with Department of Human Services, even through client service, complaint management. So again, just we can provide the data, but if for instance, I give you a list of 100 complaints or 10 complaints or 50 complaints, it just is going to be, there's some context there that's important to just keep in mind.
Yep, no, appreciate that. And
yep.
And mostly I've worked in government and commercial work and data silos, data sort of gets collected everywhere. And so I think in this case, it's just useful,
yep.
but it's, not scientific and not dispositive. So totally understand those caveats.
Absolutely. Kristen asked another question in the chat, which I think is a good one, and one we struggle with: language and communication a barrier when we do get an inquiry. Yes. Right now we have sort of some staff that we call upon to offer translation services, but our folks who answer the phone, myself included, I do not speak Spanish, and so or any other language other than English. And so when people call, if we do get Spanish-speaking callers, we have a protocol that we follow to get them with one of our colleagues to translate the issue, document it, and then hand it back off to us. But we don't have live translation. Like, for instance, if you call, I don't have the language line, and sometimes the language line is just not the best experience for those customers. I see Jennifer uses the language line. I've heard, and I don't know, Jennifer, you could offer your experience. I've heard mixed reviews of the language line. It is good for certain things, but it is also challenging. It can be sort of clunky with mixed translation. But yes, it definitely is a barrier to just plainly answer your question, Kristen.
Yeah, I mean, we use language line maybe once or twice a month. We have English and Spanish speaking staff who answer the phone, and when we have other languages, we're able to do that. But we've wondered that, like, why do people of other languages not call us? Is it a barrier because they don't feel comfortable? They don't know that that's available. And I agree, Ben, language line is not warm and fuzzy. It's just, it's a way to get words back and forth, which, sometimes is helpful, but it's not ideal.
So as an information center, we also have been able to get in touch with staff in DHS. DHS has a multi-languages staff who actually have multi-language and different skills, and so sometimes we're able to get one or two of them to actually help out. So that happens as well. Not very often, but yes, they are available and they can help. Their community service.
I didn't have much more to offer. I think as far as context, you kind of hopefully get a sense of what we do and follow up with some data, and what we don't do, namely, mediating or resolving those conflicts directly through active intervention. We can be responsive, but in many cases cannot come to a resolution if it's a two-party dispute, two or multiple party dispute.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really helpful. Any other questions for Ben? Question for you, Rolda, is there anything different about the Housing Information Center that we should know about what goes through there and what the Housing Information Center can do?
So Hector is the person who sort of manages that whole thing, and yes, he in fact keeps a call log.
Mhm.
So, and we would be able to have that information from, however long you want it requested for. So, he used to give a report of that, but I think we found that it was just number of calls by the complaint type. Some basic categories, some broad categories that he has this broken down by. And then we collect some basic information from the person. We have some building information if they give us that information. So we have, where it's coming from. So we do have that information available. And complaint types. So, and Bugata has given us their reports in the soft, and we have a breakdown as well in terms of the number and the types of complaints that they get. And we also have a breakdown by building type too. So those are the sources.
Rhoda, I think bringing up Bugata, that's an important thing to mention, that we do have a contract with them, so they're another way that we can help residents. So sometimes when there's something that we're not able to do, or they're out in the community working directly with residents, they have more of a, I think it's more of a trusted relationship, in the community. So they also, as part of their contract, are able to do some of this kind of conflict resolution stuff. So they're often able to solve individual issues and have good relationships with tenants and often with landlords. So another resource would be helpful to probably hear more about what kinds of issues they do and don't deal with.
Yeah, I mean, I this is less of a question, more of a slow transition to, I think, the discussion section. I mean, I certainly understand and agree that alternative mechanisms and forums for dispute resolution are important, which is why I wanted to be on the committee. But I'll have to admit that I'm a bit skeptical of voluntary participation, in part because, well, one, it's been tried before, and that's why I asked that question earlier. And so I guess I'm wondering, and it's two parts: is it legally possible to, through an ordinance change, require some level of binding or non-binding arbitration under county law? I think I might know the answer to that, but I'm curious if the county attorney's office has stated a position on that. And then two, from a policy perspective, has there been a decision not to pursue that as a part of this overall package, or this overall effort, that some type of mandatory participation is either unlawful or not wise from a policy perspective? I just want to know what's on and I guess the bigger picture there is, it would be helpful to know what is off the table, so that if it's like, if what's off the table in terms of tools that are available to incentivize participation in an ADR program. So I think that might be for Jennifer. My
guess, Ben, feel free to jump in, is that, it's a Dillon rule state. So pretty much any legislation that we enact needs to be enabled by the state. But, maybe that's a direction to go in. I mean, maybe advocating for state legislation could be a recommendation, if that seems like something that might be helpful.
Well, and I guess to dovetail to the other jurisdiction, I assume no other jurisdiction has, no jurisdiction in the area that has an ADR mechanism in the context of housing, that they have a mandatory component to it. That would lead me to think that there is not a state delegation of that power. But I haven't looked at the research in a while on other jurisdictions, what they're doing.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, ditto to what Jennifer offered, but also like you may ask that question of as you're performing research or perhaps
Yep.
reaching out to subject matter experts in Fairfax County or Alexandria. They may have already done the legal due diligence on that or the advocacy due diligence to sort of question, okay, well, if we were going to go that direction, how would we do it? They may have more insights than we do because we just haven't considered it.
And I'm not giving up on voluntary participation, and I think both Jennifer and Ben, you both have made the point that through relationships, Bugatti has been successful at doing it. So it's more like if you sort of have 10 tools that are available, it's helpful up front as we start our research. If there's already been a judgment that this is not the right approach, but it sounds like there may be legal limitations to dig into, and then that can be a discussion later on. So that's super helpful.
Yeah, in both of the jurisdictions, Alexandria and Fairfax, Alexandria is much not as formal a system as there is in Fairfax, and so we can there's a link in some details, and we can have a look at those too. I think in Maryland there was a different, a whole different animal, of course, because it's a different state. So there, and I'm not sure if it did anything in the District of Columbia again. Very different in terms of how they handle it.
And we know the great Dillon rule, so we get it.
So,
So
that's where they are.
And then I guess another question that I have is from the county's perspective, what is your thinking on timing? Like, we're going to dig into the research and talk to folks, but are there any county time? I know that'll be, but are there county specific, like you all want to make a recommendation to the board before the end of the year, and then we can work backwards, or is it really however long it takes? And I can't remember if the report had a timeline piece. 2023.
There was a timeline, but it's based on resources and when you're available. So I guess I would advise you to take as long as it takes, because I think we want to get it right.
Awesome. And then, sorry, one last question. If I'm looking at the CAF report, can you explain to me what the difference is between under problem solving? What's the difference between expand third-party conflict resolution and strengthen the role of the Tenant Landlord Commission in dispute resolution and create an alternative dispute resolution option? Are they all sort of flavors, in your minds, are they all flavors of the same concepts? Or is there a distinction that we should be aware of as we get started?
I think either, potentially. I mean, I think they came out of sort of separate suggestions, one being that the Tenant Landlord Commission could or should have more teeth, should have more of a role, more, you all do a sort of advice and counsel. Are there more, I won't say regulatory, because again, that would require state enabling legislation, but more of a technical resource. And then the ADR thing is just more broadly, like, what are the resources that are out there? So those two things may well mesh, or they may not.
Got it.
If that makes sense.
Yep. And sorry, I apologize, Emily. I
Keep
on
going.
No.
Just use it.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it looks like we've touched on some of the whole the section on research and stuff. And I think one of the areas that we need to look at is this area of determining what types of conflicts lend themselves to, this dispute resolution. So in looking at the data or whatever information we get, we want to determine which types of conflicts are more suitable and which ones.
And in that data, I'm gonna guess that the answer is no, but like, do we know if their issue got resolved through the county? Like whether that was like the road, someone went there and.
I don't know. We may not have that follow up.
Yeah.
Some of them we would, you pass it on to the next,
Yeah.
next stage or whatever. And we may, and sometimes we may not. Many
Oh.
times we may not, so there isn't necessarily a closing of the loop. We
Yeah.
probably wouldn't follow up with the person unless the person calls us back,
Like in my ideal head, you have a list of issues that a tenant might have.
Mhm.
And then here are issues that the county knows that they can help solve or like get you somewhere.
Mhm.
Here are the issues that, yeah, we don't have any.
Yeah.
Like where are those gaps? And if we should be focusing on the gaps or we should be focusing on getting like the last mile of those things that we.
So Jennifer, our interest is focusing on the gap, right? But I think people also want a solution, so.
Yeah, I think a little bit of both. And to your question, Emily, about outcomes, but way back in the olden days, we used to try to do like a little survey at the end of every call. Did we answer your question?
Yeah.
Did we resolve? And, we still try to do that, but often people, they're done. They got their answer. They may or may not be happy. And then for a while we tried doing follow-up calls, which was never very successful. So it's hard to know to what extent that, the counsel that you're giving is actually solving their problem. But we'd love to figure out a way to do that, again, in a way that respects people's confidentiality, that isn't like, stalking them. But did we answer your question? And is there something that we could have done differently? That'd be great to figure out.
Some of it is like not really time bound too. So like the resolution may be weeks, sometimes months, so whether it's favorable like immediately or favorable over the longer term is going to be harder to track depending on the issue. But I think it would be awesome to have that data. I think we try to do surveys and things like Jennifer mentioned, but on a case by case basis, understanding if we resolved it, that would be great. I don't have a answer to how we would even do that.
Yeah. And I think, and giving voice to Kristen in the chat, I agree as well. And I'm almost sort of thinking about, and I might be skipping ahead to the next steps in my mind, because that's how my brain works. It seems like if there are three of us, commissioner wise, I think, and it doesn't mean we actually have to do it, which, or it can and it cannot, but it seems like next month, if I'm sort of thinking ahead, it might be helpful to have some overview of the types of housing issues that the county hears about through its various mechanisms. I think if that might be a full meeting, but if not, then I think maybe also hearing from Bugada about their efforts.
I was gonna say this would probably.
Yeah, it seems like they sort of go together. Yeah. So I think that would be, I think if county staff, if county staff team here could maybe focus on that piece of getting that component organized, since you all have access to the data and the relationship with Bugada. And then maybe from a commissioner standpoint, I see that there's like digging into the regional systems in the area for dispute resolution. I think maybe a subset of that is like digging, or not a subset necessarily, but looking into like what is the scope of our legal authority on, if any, on dispute resolution, and then that deep dive into the VRLTA on what current tools, authority, low-hanging fruit exist. And so maybe among the three of us, we can each take on one of those items. That maybe not necessarily to report back in March, because March would be focused on data and Bugada, but maybe that would be the April meeting, would be, hey, we've had some time to do some independent research, and maybe we can just present out to each other on what we have found, and then use that as a launching point for a discussion on, at that point, what direction we might want to go.
Skip the month of February, so we can do that.
So we always say, oh, see, I've been living in between February. I feel like January and February. Okay, yes. So February, data and Bugada. March would be sort of, I think, more of a working session where the three of us can report out along with our accounting team on some of the research that we've been doing, and then see sort of how it all meshes together and how we want to go forward from there. Because I think, so yeah, some of that foundational research now might help us sort of not spin our wheels and things that aren't possible, et cetera, et cetera. But I'd be curious what my fellow commissioners think.
This is not gonna be able to talk.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I agree with I think that's great for February. And I didn't hear, what did you have a thought with the three things to split up for, or the?
I think
do you wanna
it's,
do-
I think it's other regional,
Yeah.
building off of Rolda's research on what other jurisdictions in Maryland and DC and Virginia do. So I think that's one research area. Second research area would be digging into the VRLTA in terms of what authorities and power or mechanisms exist in that and the legislation that would be helpful in this context.
Yeah.
And then I think the third is studying the question of whether binding mediation or arbitration is even legal in Virginia. I think those would be, and then if the fourth item is the data on what types of issues the county receives, but I would ask that for help from Jennifer and Ben and Rolda on that piece, or maybe not. I don't know who's responsible. I mean, so I defer to you all internally. But
What was that last one?
the last one would just be the data, a presentation on data related to what housing issues come up that flow through either Ben's office or the information center,
Yeah.
and then having Bugatti come to also talk about what they have seen and what they do on the mediation side.
Yeah, we can definitely get that done for the next meeting.
Awesome. And then, yeah, I think maybe we commissioners aim to get our items done by the March meeting. And then that can be more of like a working session where we report out to each other.
And Lola, when you did the initial research on Fairfax and Alexandria, is that just online, or did you talk with anyone specifically?
I think I actually spoke with them. I would have to contact for Alexander, certainly, and you check Fairfax.
Okay, so you have some contacts that we could, would it make sense to talk to them more, or
Sure.
like, were you able to get the
Yeah,
information you
sure.
think would be helpful?
Yeah. I'm familiar with some of those teams.
And I wouldn't mind doing the binding, since I have asked potentially.
I was gonna say, that is so over my head, that is definitely not me.
No, I'm happy to dig in on the, could we even possibly do anything like binding arbitration or binding mediation under Virginia law currently.
And I can get started on the regional,
Chris-
what other jurisdictions are doing.
And Kristen, would you be interested in doing the to your point, the deep dive on what tools we currently have available through current legislation? No worries, we know you're typing. I think you're typing. Don't speak. Don't. Excellent. I think we have a way to get started on this.
One thing, I mean, the sort of figuring out what the gaps are, is that, one thing I wanted to add is that Bugatti has an expanded contract this year. Another of the CAF strategies is to survey CAF residents about sort of the resident experience.
Mhm.
And there's this whole series of questions about, where are some of the gaps, what do you like about where you live? What don't you like? What stuff is, there, what services, that kind of stuff. So that they're in the process of doing that. And then there'll be surveying, I think, between 400 and 500 CAF households. So this is specific to committed affordable units, but still, I think would be really helpful information.
Absolutely.
So that's a report that they will have completed by the end of this fiscal year. So by June. So
Okay.
when Bugatti comes, maybe he can give a little preview. I don't know, but anyway, that's another potential useful piece for y'all.
100%. And what does resource mapping mean? On the agenda. Have we done it or?
So this was a phrase that Brett and Ben used. It's just a way of capturing, I guess, everything that we have, what's seeing the relationship between the various pieces.
Okay, got it.
Internal resources, staffing resources, as well as some, in any way, their external resources.
Yeah.
That be there on this in any way.
Yeah, I
Right?
think when Ben was going through all of the things, I was like, how would if I needed help, I would go online and I'd be like, what do I know what resources are available to me?
Depends on what you're looking for.
Yeah, exactly.
Housing, affordable housing, rental housing, you go to housing.
And we're not so great. I mean, in a perfect world, something you all could create would be a resource map or a flow chart or a something, or help us with that. If this, try that, or
Yeah.
because all of our different departments have, as somebody mentioned, code enforcement has a really good webpage that says, here's what we cover and here's what we don't. But I don't know that everybody has that. I think Ben's team is probably your best bet at kind of that sort of mapping, but that might be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, to Emily's comment earlier about like gaps versus what the county does work out versus what it doesn't. I mean, I think the first, I'm guessing, and sort of ADR concepts, at least what I've been experienced as a lawyer, is that you try to eliminate all of the things that could be solved outside of the process, right? So, to the degree that is possible. And so I think that part of the solution, so to speak, if there's a solution set, and that actually might be the other new reconstituted public outreach working group.
Yeah.
Our committee may have a role here to play eventually as well, is that, what can we do to prevent disputes from happening in the first place by routing people? And I think Kristen also said this in the chat already, in her comment around, the greatest show was letting residents know that there are people available to guide them and self-education. And so my guess is there isn't one, and I think it's helpful, Jennifer, to know that, if some of these strategies that are in the report come together, great. If not. But I do think some of the improving the way folks access information and navigate resources will be part of this. And then there will be the types of disputes that cannot be resolved through self-help, and that those end up becoming, okay, what do we do in that case? So that makes sense.
And Ben, does constituent services have something like that? Like, I imagine if you have, like, if someone calls about this, that means you should try this department, or like something along those lines.
Yeah, we have it's fairly robust knowledge base of like the top 100 or so issues. There's nuance under each one.
Yeah.
But in general, we know where to send people, and we've been developing that more for those two staff that I mentioned that will be sitting at the Welcome Center, because they're really a kind of almost like a deflection role of getting those folks. They come in, hey, I've got a question about this. Generally speaking, if it's one of 100 main things, and we use language that's common, we're going to get them into the right place pretty quickly. We also have a more robust, and it's not for your, I wouldn't say it's for your average Arlington resident. It's more for a segment of Arlington residents that really want to do the research on something. But we have a common list of questions and answers for constituents on our website that goes into a little bit more detail about the things that we can do and the things that we can't do and the why. But it's a little verbose, and I don't think that it's necessarily going to be germane to what you are all offering, or what the offering that you want to be able to provide. I'm not sure it's going to help, but it is there. It's common constituents questions and answers if you do want to take a look at it. Yeah.
Well, and that thought there. So I used to, my previous company, we did a lot of work in human-centered design, and thinking a lot about the experience of people who flow through systems. And so I think, or flow through processes. For example, we worked at the Department of Veterans Affairs. What is the veteran experience like when they're going to get help? And so I think there's this is more of a thought, less of an action item, that there's probably something that we should at least remember. Is I imagine for 90% of folks who have housing related issues, it might be, other than paying their relevant county taxes, it might be their very first interaction with the county as a government, or going to a county website, or calling a county number. And that could even be true for, frankly, smaller landlords who are trying to get help with a tenant that's been challenging or rent issues. So it's less of a thing to do, but it's something that I'm mindful of anything that we design or recommend. It really needs to, and this could be where Bugatti also becomes really helpful, is like making sure that we're taking into account the experiences of folks who don't go to tenant landlord commission meetings and don't ever want to, because and have a very, a different a non, they're not plugged into government, and nor should they really need to be in order to solve their challenges that they might be experiencing, and landlords as well. So, but yeah, that was just one last thought.
All right, so I think we have good action items going forward. Excited to dig deeper into this. Any last thoughts before we close out?
Nope.
Oh, we have a standard.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, right.
Remind me. So I said
Yes.
the fourth Monday, which would be the 27th of February.
Okay.
Same
Same
time.
place and same time, same location. Thank you all very much. Jennifer and Ben, thank you so much. Kristen, you feel better?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think Jennifer.
Good night.
Thanks so much for the conversation. Appreciate it. Look forward to more.
Thank you, Ben.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Yeah, there's only something